Okay, everyone, good evening. I'm going to say Shavua Tov because this is the Daf Yomi for Motzaei Shabbat, or Shabbat, I guess, Parashat Naso. And we are in Bava Metzia. Today's Daf is Kuf Chet, 108. Sorry, let me just confirm this. Okay, I'm recording this ahead of time. So today's Daf, Kuf Chet. I'm not obviously 100% sure what we got to yesterday, but I'm going to start from the top line. There's the top line of Daf Kuf Chet Amud Aleph, and the context we've been talking about is the issue of people who have forests at the side of a river. We talked yesterday about some of the common practices, which would be to cut down woods so that people who wanted to use the river, use it for like a riverboat, would be allowed to use it and be able to use it and have good access. So there was a discussion that it was appropriate to cut it down. Now, their story goes like this. Rabba bar Rav Nachman, top line of Daf Kuf Chet. Rabba bar Rav Nachman Havikazu ba'arba. He was once riding a boat down the river, and he saw Chazahu Iba. He saw that there was a woods, a forest, Dekoya Guda Dinar, that was on the bank of the river. And he said, really, this forest should be cut down. So Amalek said to the people, he was just riding down the boat, but he said to the people on the boat, Diman, who owns that forest? Amalek, they said, oh, that's Rabba bar Rav Huna, another great rabbi. That's Rabba, it's the same first name as him, but Rabba bar Rav Huna. Amri said, oh, yeah, this is, what the Navi referred to. It says in Ezra, the Navi, that Ezra complained, Yad hasarim v'haskanim hayta b'ma'al hazerishona, that it was in the Mi'ilah that was done. It was the people in charge who were supposed to be most responsible who were the ones who cheated first, which unfortunately we see a lot of. So he complained the Rabbi Bar Avuna was not following the halakha, and he was in charge. Amalei said, he's wrong. Kutsu, we should cut down this forest. So Kutsu, they all got out of the boat. They took, this is the law in their own hands. They cut down the forest. At the Rabbi Rafuna, now Rabbi Rafuna comes the next week and he finds his forest is cut down. Ashkechet the kites. Everything is cut down. Amar, and he said, oh my goodness, I want to curse. Man kaitse, whoever cut down my forest, takuts anfeh. They should cut, his branches should be cut down, which is a curse basically on his family. Amrin, they said, in fact, Kula Shnei de Rabba Barafuna, all the years Rabba Barafuna, who made the curse, was alive. Lo Kaim Lezara the Rabba Barav Nachman. Rabba Barav Nachman had no living children because of this curse of Rabba Barafuna. And it was a big machloket exactly, why they did it, why he thought he wasn't able to do it. But this was a situation that was, as we discussed yesterday, about whether or not you have to cut down the forest or not. Continues the Gemara now. Amar Yehuda, 10 lines from the top. Hakol le'igli gapa, a very contemporary discussion. If you're building a gapa, you're building a wall around the city, right? Like they built in Yerushalayim when Ezra and Nehemiah came up. It's dangerous. There's, people coming in to attack you. Everybody needs to be drafted to build that wall. And when they say everybody, it means everybody, afilu miyatmi, right? Normally we wouldn't take things from Yitomim. No one can defend them. Even the Yitomim have to contribute to build the wall around the city. Aval Rabbanan lo. But we don't generally take a tax from the Rabbanan to build the wall, my timer, because the rule is, again, this has led to many, many halachic debates, Rabbanan l'tzricha nitiruta, that the Rabbanan, the ones who are studying Torah, or the rabbis at least, don't need extra protection, because the Torah is a protection, and therefore, you can, Rashi quotes the pasuk in Mishlei, that b'shach b'cha tishmar alecha, that when you're laying down, the Torah will protect you. They can say, we don't need the wall. You want to build a wall? Use your own money. But if you're paying money for public works of karya depatya, of digging a well so that people have water, everybody needs water. Afilu midrabanan, of course, it's a play. Torah is like water, but the Rabbanan need the water as well. And so you have to take a tax even from the Rabbanan, but that's only true. It's only when they don't make them go out and personally work, meaning they collect money and hire a company to do it. The Rabbanan have to contribute. But if they say, we're not hiring a company, every man, every woman, whatever, has to give 10 hours of work, then they don't make the Rabbanan do that. Aval l'chaluza, if they're doing it, the chaluza means they're going out as a group, meaning they're physically doing it, low, because there it's not covered. Rabbanan lavnei make a chaluza dinu. Rabbanan are not kinds of people who go out and do work. So it's public respect. And so if you're going to treat the chachamim with respect, you can't force them to physically work. You can force them to pay for the water and does kind of work, things that benefit the town. Amar of Yehuda. Instead of Yehuda, some interesting rules, and this is a continuation of yesterday and all these halachot. Let's say you have a river, right? You have many houses that run down by a river. A river is a very beneficial thing because it provides nourishment, it provides water for drinking and for animals and for the fields. So let's say the Charya de Nahara, you have a blockage. Charya literally means you're digging the river. So if the river gets filled up, it gets blocked, then everyone downstream from the river loses, right? And so let's say there are 5 houses in a row, and the second house from the top, it blocks up next to that house. It's not just that second person's responsibility to unblock it. Everyone who lives downstream, who benefits from unblocking it, has to contribute. So tatai, the lower ones, meaning downstream people, Motzaei la'aloi, they have to help the upstream person. But Eloi lo Motzaei tatai. But let's say it's blocked at the second house. The person in the first house does not have to help the person downstream because he can say, I got plenty of water. I don't need to open this up. This is stopping by me, right? It's stopping past me, sorry. So therefore, you can't force that person to contribute. And the opposite would be true if you're talking about Maya de Mitra, which is rainwater or like, not usable water, like irrigation, like sewage kind of water. Chilufa b'Maya de Mitra, where you want the water to keep flowing, and if it backs up, it's going to damage the ground. So if let's say again, it's blocked at number 2, second house, house number 1, upstream has to help from and number 2, number 3, 4, and 5 don't, because they don't care if the water doesn't come. It's bad water. It's not water that contributes to their agriculture. And in fact, there's a brayta that says something very similar. Again, that the requirement to help depends on your benefit from it. Chamesh gagot mistapkot ma'im mayan echad. Let's say you have 5 ganot, 5 ginot, 5 gardens that all are supported by one well, one mayan, one spring, right? And there's, let's say, a pipe that comes from that spring that feeds all 5 in a row, right? So v'nitkakal mayan, and something goes wrong with the spring. So then kulan mitaknotim elionah. So then the top one, meaning the one closest to the spring, fixes it, but it's not just him because he's next to the spring. Everyone's got to support it because the water goes and supports all 5 houses, all 5 gardens. But nimseit, what you see there is that the tachtona mitakenet im kulam, the bottom guy, the 5th garden in the row, has to help no matter where the blockage is upstream, and he has to help his own if it blocks by his house, mitakenet la'atzma, if it's just fixing it for himself, right? But the opposite would be true about chamesh chatzerot. Chamesh chatzerot, if you have 5 courtyards, and they all have a pipe that goes, like a gutter into one pipe, basically. So then again, you want the water to flow down because it's dirty water, and you don't want it to stay behind. Nitkalkel abib, if that pipe gets ruined, then it's the bottom one who, it goes upstream, right? Everyone who's above the blockage. Let's say the blockage is at the bottom guy, everyone upstream has to help. And if it's at number 3, number 1, 2, and 3 have to help, right? So kulan mitaknot imatachtona, everyone has to contribute to do it, to fix it with the bottom person. But nimseit, and what so it turns out, the Elyonah, the person who lives at the top of the hill, has to help everybody, no matter whether it breaks at number 5, 4, 3, 2, or his, mitakenet im kulam, umitakenet le'atzma. But again, the same exact halacha, that it goes based on who's going to benefit from fixing it, and you can require everyone who will benefit. You can't say, it's not in front of my yard, but the reality is that if the water benefits you going downstream or upstream, you have to help and contribute to fixing it. We are around midway through the daf. Says Shmuel, Amar Shmuel, Haiman de'achzik berakta de nahar. Now there's a halacha, and we'll see some of the details of it, but a halacha that was very similar to the U.S., back in the day, that when there was, Rashi talks the whole thing in the days of the Parsiim, like the Wild West, the land was hefker, and basically there was a rule that anyone who went, the Homesteading Act, right? Anyone who went and lived on the land and farmed it and took care of it could keep the land. Okay, so it turns out, says Shmuel, let's say you take possession by working the land of next to the river, right? Rakta is the nar, is the bank of the river. That is a very chatzuf thing. It's a chutzpahdik thing because it means you're basically getting access up to the riverbank so people can come down and launch their boats or get off their boats. Chatzifa havi, But it's a chutzpah thing, but it's not a it's not a nice thing. But saluki lo misakin alei, we can't kick you out because the rule is that since the halacha of the Medina is that you basically get that land and it's legitimate. But nowadays, says Shmuel, remember Shmuel lived in Bava, the Kakatvi Parsai, you know what the Persians write in their legal documents? That Kinei Lecha, you can kona the land that you live on, not just up to the riverbank. Let's say you acquire, you come and you settle next to the river. You not only get to keep the land next to the river, but you get to keep Ad Malay Savare Susyamaya, till the neck of the horses in water. I mean, you get 20 feet out into the river until it gets deep. That's the halacha. Then we actually are allowed to kick you out. Sluki nami misakinale. Our halacha is that we can kick you out because you're basically then taking away space from the river, which is not yours to take. The river it belongs to everybody. And since basically by the Persian rule, they would say, because you're living on the bank, you can go out into the river. We say that's not correct, and you have to be kicked out of that land. Amar Rav Yehuda. Sorry, I lost my place here. Amar, where am I? Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. We are the fourth to last narrow line on Daf Kufchet Amar Aleph. Says Rav Yehuda Marav, Haiman da'achzik beni achi. Let's say a person, right, goes and there's Hefker land, and according to the Persian rule, you're allowed to go, whoever lives in that land and takes care of the crops for 3 years. It doesn't Russia doesn't have the exact details, but takes care of the crops for a certain period of time, gets to keep it. So there's an empty plot of land, and it's in between where two brothers live, right? Or two partners, and they don't have enough money, or they don't have the wits, or they don't have the space, the power to actually live on the land, but they're trying to get richer and acquire extra land. So, but you, before they get to do that, you go and you are machsak, and you grab this land between two brothers. Says Rav Yehuda Marav, Haimanda achzik beni achi, you are machsik, you grab land that you're then allowed to keep according to the rule between brothers or beni shutfi or between partners. Chatzifa habi. That's an inappropriate thing, a chutzpah thing to do. But the halacha is sluki lo misakinale. We can't actually take you out of the land. But Rav Nachman, a member who also lived in Bavel, said no, misakinan, nami misakin. You can kick him out. That goes against the Jewish standards of decency, and you're not allowed to take over land. Go take over land somewhere else. There's plenty of open land. Don't choose land that's going to ruin somebody else's contiguity between brothers or partners. However, imisham dina de bar mitzvah, if the person comes to you to say to you, look, remember the halacha bar mitzvah, which we've discussed several times before, is that a person whose border, right, I own a field and that my neighbor wants to sell the field, I basically have a right as the neighbor to buy the field for the same price from whoever gets that field from the neighbor. Meaning someone, if Reuven and Shimon live next to each other, and Levi buys a field from Shimon, Reuven can go to Levi and say, you have to sell it to me for the price that you paid because I have a right of a neighbor to get the land first. If this is, now we're talking about a situation where it's Hefker land, right? So if I am not a brother, where it's two brothers in between each other, but the person comes and says, look, it's Hefker land, but I'm your neighbor, I'm the neighbor, I should get it first. You don't kick him out because he can say, this is the land, it's free for me, I'm allowed to take it. But Nahardai said, no, you do. Even if the neighbor comes to him and says, I wanted to get this free land, and I'm the neighbor, he's allowed to kick the person out, mishum shenemar, and it's based on the pasuk which says, Asita hayashar v'hatov b'nei Hashem. You should always do what's right and good, even if maybe by the Persian rule you're allowed to take it against the Torah. That goes against the Torah. Now, let's say, right, ata imlichbei. We get some very interesting questions, right? So let's say a person comes and he's trying. Where are we up to? Ata imlichbei. A person comes, imlich means he asks a question, and he says, right, I want to buy this field, okay? And then he goes to the neighbor, and the neighbor says to him, Reuven lives next to Shimon. Shimon wants to sell his field. Levi wants to come buy the field, but he knows that Reuven gets right of first refusal. So he goes to Reuven and he says to him, look, right, I want to buy this field. Is it okay with you if I buy it? Amarle, Azel Izbin, is it okay with you if I buy this field? And Amarle, and the neighbor says to him, yeah, Zilzvon, go ahead and buy it. I don't really want the field, right? That's the case. So the neighbor says to him, right, I want to buy the field. And the neighbor says, no problem, go buy the field. Tzarech lemikna minei. You have to make a kinyan so that the neighbor gave up his rights of bar mitzvah with a kinyan, or just by saying it, is that enough? Oh, lo, meaning can he come later and say, I changed my mind? Ravina says, lo tzarech lemikna minei. You don't need to make a kinyan. If the neighbor says you can buy it, he can't come a week later or a year later and say, I changed my mind, I want to buy the field. It's too late. I already bought it. The Hardai says, no, it's not true. That the ownership of bar mitzvah is a real ownership. It's like a kinyan. And if I give up that kinyan, I have to do it through an act, right? Tzarech lemikna minei. If Levi wants to come buy this field of Ruvain that's next to the field of Shimon, he's got to actually make a kinyan from Shimon to get permission to do that. Otherwise, Shimon can always come to him later and say, I wanted to buy it. I'll give you money and get out of here. The Hilchata, and that is the halacha, tzarech lemikna minei. You got to make a kinyan, meaning that the right of acquiring a field as a neighbor is a very firm right, and to give it up, you would have to make a kinyan. Says the Gemara. Now, interestingly, since that's the halacha, hashta de amr, we are 7 lines from the bottom. Hashta de amr tzarech lemikna minei. Now that you said that's the halacha, that you have to make a kinyan to get away from the rights of bar mitzvah. Lo kanamine. Let's say Levi comes to Shimon and says, I want to buy the field next to you. Do you want to buy it? And Shimon says, don't worry, you go buy it. But he didn't make a kinyan. So a year later, Shimon can come to Levi and say, I changed my mind. I'm the neighbor. I had rights. I didn't give you my rights over with the kinyan. I want the field from you, but I'll pay you for the field. But let's say the field went up in price, right? Or the field went down in price. Does Shimon have to pay Levi the current price, or does he pay him the original price? Says the Gemara, in fact, what we would say is that since you have to make a kinyan, essentially this field is Shimon's field the whole time. And Iyakar V'Zol B'Shutei of Shimon. The field went up and down in his possession. He doesn't have to pay. I mean, he has to pay whatever the current value is, not the original value that Levi paid to buy the field. So let's get that's that case. The next case is, let's say Zavin B'Meya V'Shavi Mata. Let's say Levi bought this field from Ruvain next to Shimon for 100, right? And Shimon, but it's really worth 200. So Levi got a steal. He bought the field really cheap. Shimon came and says to him, okay, I'm the neighbor. I have a right to buy it. So I will take over possession from you, Levi, and I'll give you your money. I'll give you your 100 that you paid for the field. Levi says, that's ridiculous. I paid 100, but it's worth $200 this field. I want 200 from you. Says the Gemara Chasina. What you do is you see, right? What you see is, why did Reuven sell the field to Levi for 100? Let's say Reuven was desperate for money. He would have sold it to anybody for 100. Then Shimon says, I'm only going to pay 100. Shimon pays 100 to Levi, which is what Levi paid to Reuven, and he walks away. The low, but if it's not the case, if the field's worth 200, Reuven would have sold it for everyone to 200, but he liked Levi. Levi was his friend. Levi was his relative. He gave it to him for cheaper, then Shimon doesn't get benefit from Levi's goodness. Shimon would have to pay the market rate, which is 200, in order to get Levi off the field. And what about the opposite way? What if Zavan ben Matan, let's say Levi paid 200 for this field, he overpaid. And Shimon now comes and says, I'm the neighbor. I really had a right to get it. I never gave a kinyan. You didn't really have a right to buy it. I'll buy it off you. But it's only Shavim Maya. It's only worth 100. I don't want to pay you 200. So Savormina, they thought to say, that Motzaei that Shimon can say to Levi, the Takuni Shadartich will love tea. You bought it basically from the neighbor. I get to buy it from you, but I didn't get this in order to make myself a bad deal, to overpay. Amr Le, Rakshisha, Raider of Chisel, Ravashi, Hachiyam, Rina Hardai, Mishmeder of Nachman. In fact, Ain Ona'ah Karkot. It's not, you don't say that. By remember, Ona'ah is a rule of overpaying, but by Karka, there's no principle of overpaying, because Karka is very individual. Right, the same plot of land might mean something very different to many different people, and therefore there is no overpaying. And so the price that Levi paid is the price. And if Shimon wants to get Levi off the field, he's got to pay him back the whole 200. Now, let's say, right, a person, this is an interesting case, Zavin le griva de Arab emsa nichse. Let's say a person has, a huge plot of land, and he sells to another guy a very small, griva de Arab means a small beit sa'ah, right? 1 acre, let's say, of land within a 20-acre field, smack in the middle of the land, right? So now this seems very suspicious, right? Because it seems like basically again, Reuven has 20 acres. There's neighbors all around it. Shimon comes and buys 1 acre in the middle. So it seems to everybody, it seems to me what he's doing is he's trying to get a foothold in the land. Once Shimon owns an acre in the middle, now he can buy the rest of Reuven's land and say, I'm a neighbor too, right? So it seems very fishy. Says the Gemara, well, you got to investigate. Chazina, you have to look into it. Iditi, let's say it's a great field, right? Or, right, great idit means very, very valuable field. Or zibarti, or it's a very unvaluable field, meaning it's its own unique thing. So it's a kind of thing which sticks out. Then it's reasonable to say that's why he bought that piece of land. And zvina and the sale is chal. But elo, from the page Daf Kuf Cherem a bit, but if there's nothing special about this land, and then it seems that he only bought a tiny piece because he's starting to make an inroad. And then we say, Irume Kamarim, like he's just playing a trick, and he doesn't become a neighbor in order to buy the rest of Reuven's lands, and the other neighbors can say, you're not really one of us. What about Matana, right? What if Reuven owns the field next to Shimon? Shimon wants Reuven's house, let's say houses for a second, but Reuven doesn't want to sell to Shimon, he gives it away, gives it as a gift. Can Shimon then come to the gifted person and say, wait a second, I'm the neighbor, I get first rights. I deserve it as a gift. Says Gemara, that's ridiculous. Of course not. Matana letba mishum din bar mitzvah. If you give away as a gift, no one else can come and say, I deserve the gift. There's no rights to gifts. Amar Amemar, but it says Amemar, but of course, there were unscrupulous people who gave things as gifts and they took money under the table. Right. And so if in the gift, right, it says, I, Reuven, give my field to Levi. And if anyone ever takes it from Levi, I'll give him a different field. That does not sound like a gift. That sounds like a cheating deal, right? Ikatavla, if you write achrayut, you write in the gift saying, I give you my field, and if a debtor ever comes, collects the field from you, I'll give you a different field, then that seems very much like you made a sale that you're not advertising. And a sale, the bar mitzvah, that would have a limitation of a bar mitzvah, meaning a neighbor can come and say, if you're going to sell it to him, you have to sell it to me first, and therefore I can go from him, buy it off of him. Now, the next case, 4 lines from the top, what if you're machar kon chasav le'echad? What if a person has 10 fields and they want to get rid of their whole portfolio? So they sell it all to one person. Now, one of their fields is next to Shimon, and Shimon says, I want that field. I don't want your other 9 fields, but I want that one. Says the Gemara, you can't say that because he sold it as a package, right? Letba mishum din bar mitzvah. It's not a one field next to Shimon. It's a whole package. And as Rashi points out, I think Rashi points out, Rashi points out that sometimes you get a much worse deal, right? If you're selling piece by piece, maybe a person only says, I would only buy your portfolio if I get everything. I don't want to buy one part. So therefore, you can't undo the sale. Now, let's say you sell a field. Let's say Reuven again sells his field, not to his neighbor Shimon, but to some guy Levi. But Levi owned this field before Reuven. He was the original owner. Then let Lebalim Harishonim, even though they don't currently live next to it, let them mishum din bar mitzvah because they do have a connection to the land, just like the neighbor. Zavan migoy v'zavan legoy. Let's say Reuven sells his land from a non-Jew to a non-Jew or from a non-Jew. Then let them mishum din bar mitzvah. There's no halacha of Shimon, the neighbor, saying, I want to buy it, or you have to sell it to me. Why is that? Because Zavan Migoy, let's say, again, a Goy lives next to Shimon, and Reuven comes and buys the land. Shimon can't come to Reuven and say, I have a right to buy it first. You're not allowed to buy it. Because Reuven could say, look, I'm doing you a favor. You live next to someone who didn't follow the same rules as us. Avriach lecha mimatzrecha. I kicked the lion off of your border. I'm helping you. So you can't tell me that I'm doing something dirty against you. And the same thing would be true, the same halacha would be true if Reuven sold it to a non-Jew, that Shimon can't come to the non-Jew and say, our rules are that I'm a neighbor. Zavan legoy, if you sell it to a goy vaday lav bar vasita hayashar hatovu. Even if the goy would listen to you, the psukim don't apply in that context. The pasuk that requires you to give a field to a neighbor is based on asita hayashar hatov, which doesn't apply to a non-Jew. Now, of course, says the Gemara, it's a very not nice thing to sell your field to a non-Jew and not to your neighbor. So the owner of the seller, Reuven in this case, shamuti vati mishamtinole, we're going to put Reuven into chirim. We're going to say, you did something wrong and we're going to punish you as a community, ad mekabel aleh kol unsid atile machmatei. Till he gives you insurance, right? Till he says, look, if this neighbor causes you any trouble, I will reimburse you. which is a responsibility because you shouldn't have invited someone who doesn't necessarily follow the same rules to be a neighbor. It doesn't have to be a non-Jew, but that's the case here. Now, mashkanta, the same thing would be true. Let's say, again, Ruvain and lives next to Shimon. Ruvain borrowed $10,000 and he gave his field as a mashkun to Levi, right? Then he wants to sell it to Levi, or Levi, instead of paying off the loan, will get the field. Then left by mishum din the bar mitzvah. Mashkanta is not considered to be fall under the properties of a neighbor that the neighbor gets to buy it. Damar Ravashi, because as Ravashi said, and we've had this before, Amrli Sabi de Mata Machasio, the old people, the old timers in Mata Machasio told me, you know what the word mashkanta comes from? My mashkanta, the shchuna gabe, that you're living in that space. So, meaning once Levi holds a mashkon, he's almost an owner. And so he's just as close as the neighbor, Shimon. My nafkamina, the bar mitzvah, your shchuna, you're living there in regards to the rules of bar mitzvah. The next halacha is where we up there, where there's a tet in mine, ein mishpat, limkar birachok, like 12 lines or so from the top. If you're going to sell something far away, meaning let's say Ruvain, right, want to buy a field that's right next to my house. And in order to buy that field, I want to sell a field that I have that's very far away, right? So then I don't have a responsibility to go to the neighbors and do it because I really want to sell the field and make the money so I can buy something close, meaning there's something very advantageous to me to sell that field. I don't have to go to the neighbor. You only have to go to the neighbor if there's nothing for you to lose by going to the neighbor, or very little for you to lose. So if you're selling the field, you're selling a faraway field in order to buy one close to your house, the Gol B'Karov, or you're selling a bad field because you have an opportunity to buy a better one, B'Rav, the Gol B'Yafeh, then you don't have to start bothering with the neighbors. Letba Mishum Dina de Bar Mitzvah, because you just basically take the first and best deal that you can get. Let's say a person is selling a field because they need to raise money for taxes, right? The karga members, the head tax, limizoni, or because they just need to support their family, right? Mizonot of the wife and children, or the kfura, or he's got to pay for a kfura. All of these things, you need money fast, and you can't wait. You can't, you can't delay paying your taxes. You're going to pay a lot extra. You can't delay a funeral. You can't delay paying your family's food. And so then you could take whatever's fastest. You don't have to go to the neighbors. And let's make mishum din de bar mitzvah. You don't have to worry about going to the neighbors. The Amri Naharda, because as Naharda said, for these things, the karga, for the tax purposes, the mizoni, for food for women and your wife and your dependent children, likfura, and for burial money, mizavdina b'la achrasta. These are things you can sell even without making an announcement. Remember, we had halacha that when you're selling possessions, usually of a yatom or others, you have to announce it ahead of time so you build up a market. These are things you need money quickly, you can sell quickly. Now, the isha, if let's say you're selling a field to a woman, uliyatmi, or to yitomim, ulishutfi, or to your partner, and all those are cases where these are not the shutfim, they're already there. But the woman and the yitomim, they don't have a lot of opportunities back in those days for sure to buy land. And so the fact that they have this opportunity and it works out and they happen to make this connection, they don't have to, it's a rare thing, it's an important thing for them. And let's ba mishum din de bar mitzvah, they don't have to worry about first selling it to the neighbor. Now, let's say, now we're past bar mitzvah here. We are up to Shechinei Ha'ir, more than halfway down. But this is more derech eretz. You should do the right thing. So let's say you have people who are interested in buying your field, and some are your neighbors from the city, meaning they live next to you, and some are your neighbors in the field, their farm next to you. So then, Shechinei Ha'ir v'Shechinei Sadeh, you have neighbors from the city and neighbors from the field. Shechinei Ha'ir kodmim. The neighbors who live next to you in the city should come first. That's the people you have a closer relationship with. Again, it's not really based on anything in the Torah. It's just based on that was their relationship patterns. If you have a shachen v'talmid chacham, you have a neighbor and a scholar who both want to buy your land, then talmid chacham kodem. Again, assuming you're not losing money on it, right? But it's the same equal money. You should give it to the talmid chacham. If you have a karova talmid chacham, let's say your cousin and a talmid chacham both want to buy your property, don't go to your cousin. Talmid chacham kodem. You give it to the talmid chacham. But they asked, what if you have a neighbor and a cousin? Shachen v'karov mai. Who's more important, blood or friendship, right? Tashma says the Gemara, of course, the pasuk in Mishlei, Tov shachen karov me'ach rachok. It's better to have a close neighbor, close meaning in relationship, than a far away, a distant brother. So in this case, relationship should trump blood. Now, Hani Zuzi Tavi, Hani Zuzi Tikuli. Let's say one person has money to pay you, that's good money, Tavi, and one has money that is Tikuli means it's messed up, right? It's broken, it's not so good, it's not so, etc. Says the Gemara, you don't have to then sell it to the one who's your neighbor, even though normally you would have to, if he's giving you inferior coins. Letba mishum dina de bar mitzvah. You don't have to worry about dina de bar mitzvah because it's inferior. And what if one of them, it's a very interesting discussion Rashi goes through, Hani tziyari, one of them has coins that are wrapped up. So he says, here's $1,000, but you don't know if it's $1,000. Now you're not going to open it up and count it, because once you open it up and say, oh, it's only 800, he'll say, oh, there was 1,000, but you took 200 out, right? So you have to wait till the person comes and you observe it and you count the $1,000. But the other guy has money right in front of you. Hani sharo, it's right in front. Says the Gemara, then you don't have to wait for the guy with the tied up money to come back and count it, even if he's your neighbor. You could just take the one that's easier. You don't have to make problems for yourself. Let's mishum dina de bar mitzvah. You don't have to worry about bar mitzvah. Amar, let's say the guy says, your neighbor says to you, don't sell the field to Levi. I'll pay you the same price. I just got to go to the bank and get a loan. Azov itrach laiti zuzi. I'm going to go and I'll work and I'll raise money and I'll bring you the money. You could say, buddy, I'm not waiting for you. Lo natrina le, I'm not waiting for you to go raise money. But if he says, Amar, if he says, Azov aiti zuzi, no, I have it in the bank. I just got to go to my safe deposit box and pick it up. It means I'll go and I'll bring the money. Then you investigate. Chazina, you assess. Do you think he really has $10,000 in the bank? If he's a upstanding person, is literally what amid means. Amid means rich, usually, right? A person who's got substance, then azul mighty zuzi is going to go get money. Then you should wait for him, because if he has the money and he can bring it, natrina lei. But ilo lo natrina lei. But if he's just you don't have to trust him, then you don't have to give him the time to prove himself wrong. You can just sell it to the other person. Now, what if you have a case where one person owns the land and another person bought a house on the land, which of course is a very common thing. The arrangement was that if you buy a house on the land but don't own the underlying land, you get to live in that house as long as the house stands. If the house ever falls down, you don't have a right to rebuild the house. Okay, so you bought the house is gone, you're gone. The land, of course, always belongs to the owner of the land. So in a case where you have ara dechad, you have land that belongs to one person, ubati dechad, and a house on that land that belongs to another person, and each one wants to sell, right? Meaning each individual would like to sell their part. Says the Gemara, Mari Ara, the first wide line, Mari Ara ma'akev amari bati. The owner of the land can say to the owner of the house, I don't want you to sell your house to anybody because it's on my land. I have to approve it. But Mare Bate Lo Ma'akiva Mare Dara. The owner of the house cannot say to the owner of land, I don't want you to sell the land. I have no rights on the land. So basically, the owner of the land has some rights on who lives in the house. The owner of the house has no rights on who owns the land. But let's say the similar thing happens with property, right? With plants. Ara Dechad V'Dikla Dechad. One person owns a plot of land. Another person owns the tree on that land. The same thing is true. As long as the tree, the dikkel, the date tree, is growing, he gets all the date palm, the palm, right? The palm tree. Once the tree falls down or gets disease or dies, he can't rebuild it or can't replant it. So the same thing is true. The owner of the land, Mari Ara Matzi Makiv Amari Dikli, sorry. The owner of the property can say to the owner of the palm tree, I don't want you to sell it without my permission. But Mari Dikli, Matzi Makiv Amari Da'ara. But the owner of the tree cannot stop the owner of the land from selling his land to anyone he wants to. Okay. Ara levate, ara lizara. Now back to the earlier case where we're trying to pick up precedence in who you should sell it to. Let's say someone says, I want to buy your plot of land because I want to build a house. Another guy says, I want to buy your plot of land because I want to plant cucumbers. Says the Gemara, Yishuv Adif. We give precedence to people who want to live there. If you're going to live there, not to rent it out, of course, but to live there yourself, you get the land. And furthermore, even if the other guy is a neighbor, you don't have to give it to the neighbor, because if he wants to use it for planting, when you want to use it for living in, we preferentially give it to someone to live in. Now, let's say, which is very interesting, let's say if sak mishunita, there's like a row of stones that is a hefsek between the two fields. There's two fields that are owned, right? And one person wants to sell his, and he's got a neighbor, but between him and his neighbor is a row of stones. Oh, richva de dikla, or what do you call it? Like an avenue of trees, right? Richva means a row of decal trees. So meaning you can't put corn on one side and corn on the other. There's a row of trees that you can't get past in between. Says the Gemara, Chazina. Well, you see, if you can make a small space between those two fields to actually connect them with even one row, even one telem, if you can connect them with even one furrow, then they're connected. And itba mishum din the bar mitzvah, and the neighbor who lives on the other side of the rocky encroachment has a right to buy it because he's a neighbor. But elo, if there's a complete break and you can't even get one row of cucumbers in between, then even though they're approximately next to each other, they're not considered to be neighbors. Letba mishum din the bar mitzvah, because remember the whole thing of bar mitzvah is that you can combine the fields and get more benefit. But if you can't even combine them, then there is no understanding of bar mitzvah. And finally, for today's daf, we're 2 lines from the bottom. Let's say you have Hani Arba B'nei Mitzri, right? Remember, everyone who's got a field, generally, not always, but you would have 4 neighbors, right? On east, west, north, and south. So you want to sell your field, right? You want to sell your field. 4 people can say to you, I'm next to you, right? There's one person on your east. Rashi gives you a good picture here of something else, but if you look at the square in the Gemara, I think everyone should have that, right? You own the field in the middle. You have a neighbor on the right, the left, the top, and the bottom. So who gets it? Says the Gemara, whoever comes first. The Kadam Echad Minayav Zavin, if one of them comes and says, I want to buy it, Zvina Zvina. The other ones can't stop him. But let's say they all come together. Let's say all 4 neighbors come at the same time. Says the Gemara, Palgule Bekarnizil. You split it up like a karnizil. Karnizil, Rashi gives a beautiful drawing again of it. He says karnizil means, Rashi says, Lashon karnizil, zil likranot. You split it up to the corners, meaning, as you see in this picture, you make 4 triangles out of it, right? And so each of the neighbors gets not the whole field that's connected to him, and then up to, I guess, 45-degree angles. If it's square, it doesn't have to be square, right? We get all those angles up to a point. And then the same thing is true in every direction. So if all 4 want it, they each get an equal spot, and they each get 100% of what's next to them, and then a diminishing amount up to the middle. And that's called a karnizil. And so we will conclude with there up to the Mishnah, and God willing, tomorrow we will continue on Daf Kuf Tet. Thank you very much, everyone. Shavua Tov.